This video is sponsored by Frontier Developments. This habitat I built for the giant pandas was actually the very first habitat I built on the console edition of Planet Zoo. The way I approached creating this habitat was very similar to what I used to do back on the PC version. The terrain is easily one of the most important things in a habitat. It is the foundation for everything else. I never like to make an enclosure that is totally flat. Even less dramatic terrains still have a little bit of variation. I needed to dramatically increase the terrain height, so I chose the terrain stamp tool. I was able to consistently place terrain at around the same height and get a general shape of the mountain I was making. I then sculpted some finer details to get the mountain looking, more mountain-like. I wanted to make a structure that was built into the hillside, so I made sure to sculpt out a nice cave. I continue to change the terrain shape as I build the rest of the habitat, but this is a great start. I had a pretty clear idea of what I wanted the shelter building in the panda habitat to look like, so I just went right in with it. The shape would be pretty simple, just a large box, since I knew the colors in the roof shape would make the building stand out. And what made this structure especially easy is that I only had to build 3 sides of it. I continued to block out each layer of the building. You'll notice that I have the grid size set to 2 meters. This is so I can be really precise with where I place my walls. Again, I really don't want this building here to be too big, or it might shadow over the pandas and take away their spotlight. We wouldn't want that. Something I really recommend is to make your building in layers. Before I did any of the detailing work, I had to make sure that I got not only the general shape right, but also the height, the roof, and anything else that would be hard to move around later. I was really glad I followed my own advice here. As you can see, I had to raise up the second story of the building. That probably would have been a bit more complicated to do if I had put all the decorations on it. So this last part of this base layer of a building was just extending out the front. I thought that the boxy roof was just slightly too plain, but it was an easy enough fix to add another box out in front of it. And thankfully, the roof that's part of the East Asia set in the base game gave me the exact vibe I was looking for. In fact, I used a lot of pieces from the East Asia set in this build. It's really like it was made for these pandas. Of course, I wasn't just going to leave this building plain. I wanted to add a pop of color into the structure, so I chose this really pretty deep teal. I basically covered the whole facade of the building in this color. I used this door with a really pretty pattern as a window actually. I framed the window with some more beams, and then duplicated everything I had across the face of the building. I then continued layering and layering the painted East Asia timber pieces until I felt that the building was complete. I even managed to sneak in a few more windows. After the main building was done, I needed to make this habitat look like it was in a beautiful taiga forest. I also carved out a little moat to separate the pandas from the guests, and because it looks pretty too. That's when I decided that one building wasn't enough, so I built a smaller tower just to give the enclosure that oomph that I felt was missing. I think that this little tower really enhances the mountainous vibe of the build. Now, how do I actually contain the pandas? Well, across from the moat, I simply used a path from where the guests can get a great view of the enclosure. I did want the zoo guests to be able to get a close-up encounter with the pandas, so I made a little glass wall section as well. This was framed by a custom fence that I made. I then went on to use this fence here to surround pretty much the rest of the habitat. Now it's time for my favorite part of making the habitat, the planting. I first made sure to filter the plants by only what the pandas liked so that they would be nice and happy in their enclosure. I used the really tall coniferous trees mostly just to create a backdrop behind the mountain. You can see that they don't really overlap much into the habitat, and that is completely on purpose. The area just outside of the actual footprint of the habitat always needs to be decorated so that it fits into the zoo. The rest of the foliage just consisted of smaller trees, as to not obstruct the view of the pandas, some shrubs, and a lot of moss. I wanted the foliage to be just as detailed and magical as the structure I built earlier. And of course, I had to include a bit of bamboo for the pandas. And this is the finished habitat. I think that the pandas look super happy in here. I love watching them all gathered around eating bamboo, and the whimsical backdrop just adds to the amazing vibes.